So last year, I started a costume with two main goals. One, I want to make a fantasy witch character. Two, I want it to be comfy as heck no matter the weather, whether it's disgustingly humid all the way to freezing cold nights. Because damn it, I always choose the most ridiculous costumes, and just this once, I want to look awesome and be comfy. Hello, I'm Miss Twisted. You can call me Charlotte. I do cosplay and makeup and other weird and whimsical stuff. And this time, I'm making a moth witch. And to clarify, I mean a witch with a mothy theme. I don't mean like a literal moth human hybrid. Although given my track record, I wouldn't be surprised if that was your first guess. I used to be a bit cynical about all of these trendy aesthetics like the frogs, the witchy, the cottagecore, the mushrooms, but I kind of warmed up to it once I realized I was being a huge hypocrite judging people for focusing in on a particular concept. Gesturing vaguely towards all of my owls. So I wanted to join in on the fun and create my own little whimsical witchy character. Now, part of the fun of designing an original character is, well, the designing part. On top of all the regular planning you have to do for a cosplay, you have to get this nebulous concept out of your brain and into something tangible. So I'm going to run you through my plan for this project with the help of today's sponsor, Milanote. Milanote is an organization tool for creative projects, so it's perfect for something like the Moth Witch. I've got my project plan here and we'll come back to that, but I'm actually going to jump into my mood board to show you where it all started. Side note, the way you can nest boards within boards like this, oh my god, I love it. There's so many clever little functions in Milanote, but everything is so intuitive it did not take me long to get stuck in. And they've got tons of templates to help you get started, or you can build from the ground up and just drag in elements as you need them. So I've been slowly hoarding together my inspiration images, and the web clipper tool made it super fast and easy to pull directly onto my board. No screenshotting or copy pasting required. I created this color scheme using Milanote's dropper tool to pull the colors directly from my inspiration images. And this right section is images I'm using as an inspiration for the overall concept. I freehanded some little notes on top here to help me keep track of the elements that I liked most. My scrappy little sketches are right here in the middle. Over on the left, I've got text and images focused more on the aesthetics themselves. With these three images, I've organized into a column to kind of represent the key elements. Back to my project plan overall, and you can see I've got this bad boy organized as heck. The task list gives me an overview so I can see the project broken down into these smaller sections. I've broken down these tasks into a schedule to help me keep on track, and you can even put in and organize different links to shops, videos, arrows, and even a Google Map link, which I used here for one of my favorite hidden gem fabric places. And the shopping list I made, I can tick off in the mobile app while I'm, well, shopping. The fact that Milanote is completely free, no time limit, is genuinely awesome, you guys. Like, I really hope you will check it out and try it. And if you're already using it for your own projects, let me know in the comments what you're working on. Try Milanote yourself and sign up for free using the link in the description below right now. As for me, well, with everything organized and ready to rumble, let's get into it. So in terms of visuals, we're sticking with a pretty neutral color palette as you saw. The vibes are dusty, faded shadows, soft and wispy. We're going all in on texture. Knitted, frayed, tasseled, tattered. Old and crumbly, but comfortable and homely like a teddy bear worn with age. In terms of symbolism, the Moth Witch as a character, I envisioned as kind of a cross between a fantasy hospice nurse, or Charon the ferryman, or the Grim Reaper herself, appearing when those in their last days need comfort to ease their passing. She chooses moths as her companions as a symbol of gentle decay, less rot and more something drying up into ash. And not to get too heavy or philosophical, I think I am in a roundabout way channeling and confronting my own existential dread in this character. And so I wanted this character to reflect some of the sentiments that soothe that fear for me. So she'll have these aesthetics that feel unnerving yet comforting. A character of death, yes, but soft and gentle, albeit creepy. A character that represents some sort of peace. A reassurance that this is the natural way of things. Okay, thank you guys so much for putting up with me waxing poetic about the symbolism behind this character and the plan. I think it's about time we got stuck into it. And for that, I am way ahead of you all because I actually started this in September last year and then stopped for ages due to a combination of like health problems, other commitments, and waiting for supplies to arrive. So we're gonna go to past me, and heads up, this is when I was still using my crappy little phone and no proper recording equipment, so the footage is well, it is what it is. Honestly, looking back over it, it's just nice to see how much I've improved, even in the space of a year. So this giant witch hat was the first thing I made. Check out this gigantic straw hat that I've got. This is gonna be absolutely perfect for my witch hat base. And then I'm gonna keep the straw texture underneath because it's still kind of in those beige tones that I want. And I'm gonna like fabric all this up into a giant witch hat. Maybe not with the point, I might just keep it low like this. I haven't decided yet, I'll see what looks good. So to cover up the straw hat, I have just stretched across this grey jersey fabric that's just pinned in place while I sew. With the rest, I'm going to cut out basically a semicircle out of this jersey and sewed on some stabilizer because this is going to be the cone of the hat, so I wanted to have a bit of structure. Folding this piece in half, right sides together, I'm sewing down that line to form my cone. I wasn't aiming for a super tall pointy hat anyway, so I'm happy with this. It was really nice doing this project knowing I didn't have to worry about having lovely finished edges and could just zigzag stitch it straight onto the hat. And since I was using beige thread against the grey hat, I just kept going with this one to create some cool lines around the hat. I know I say this about every project, but it really is just vibing the whole way. I had this really cool spidery looking trim that I got ages and ages ago, and I just had some leftover leather dye from who knows how long ago. So I'm just going to paint the edge of this one and sew it on. I just kind of wanted a cool trim around the hat. And so base hat so far looking pretty good. Step 2 for me was modifying this skirt. I'm using a pre-made skirt just because like I have the perfect skirt for this. This is one of the Holy Clothing skirts. Following my own no plans, just vibes philosophy, I'm just trimming a bunch of jagged edges into the bottom here. And my plan is to basically like tease the edges a little bit to try and encourage some of that fraying, which sort of worked. My thoughts are to basically layer up different ways of distressing and disintegrating these fabrics to make the whole effect. I did try burning some of this fabric, but it didn't seem to really do much besides give it a bit of a burn stain. Also, please be careful if you're trying this yourself, do fire safety stuff, all that jazz. Surprisingly, I had a decent amount of luck with the Dremel, except it kept getting caught in the fabric and would just take forever. And I swapped out the ties for some of this beige cording. Next, I was finally adding in some more beige elements with this top and this little belty thing that I made out of the offcuts. So for this, I was using linen that I'd coffee stained. Actually, I think this is the first time I ever tried coffee staining. Anyway, I'm using an existing wrap top as like a bit of a guide to try and help me figure out my patterns, along with draping, which from my understanding is basically just pinning things to a mannequin to try and get the right shape you want. This is your daily reminder that I have no idea what I'm doing at any given moment. My entire life is trial and error, and once you've done enough errors, you just start to be pretty good at trialing things. Once I had a vague idea of my patterns, I'm just sewing all these pieces together. I did do some finishing and reinforcing stitches on the seams here because that is going to hold the top together, so you can't really have those ones fraying. And much like the hat, I started to do some zigzag stitching and satin stitching, this time in grey against the beige, just really for some extra texture and details. Okay, so the top is done, and I love this. I love the like mottled texture of the dyeing. I love the texture that these like random little satin stitch lines give. It definitely gives me like insect wing vibes. And with the leftover linen pieces, I basically just sewed them all into one big strip with like some of those frayed edges showing on the outside. I figured it would make a nice textured belt, and I think that was a smart move because I actually love these. I have a love-hate relationship with airbrushing. I love the effect, but I constantly have issues with blockage. See that tiny cube on the bottom right? That was the compressor I was using, so now you might realize why I was having issues. Don't worry, the airbrush redemption arc is coming later in this video. I also had a ton of feathers, beads, and yarn left over from previous projects, so I'm making a couple little hanging bits just for decoration too. This was, I think, the first time I have done any knitting in like over a decade. And these bits are all just various bits of braided yarn, as you can see, but honestly, I start to tie these to things like the hat, around the belt, coming across the chest, and you'll be surprised how quickly all of that texture adds up. So the next step, well, you can't have a moth witch without moths. Now I knew I wanted a lot of moths and I was not about to hand paint or hand draw them. So I got some decent quality photos printed, cut them out and glued them back to back. Now we need to seal them so they're not going to disintegrate in the rain. So I've got some matte Mod Podge for that. This took ages because I made so many moths for this. Of course I had to make sure I got all the edges as well, and then once it was dry I had to do the other side as well. For the body of the moth, I've literally got a tiny piece of faux fur that I am hot gluing together. And then I hot glue this piece straight to the wings. For my fuzzy little moth antenna, I have no shortage of feathers, so I cut some of these pheasant plumage feathers into a sort of point and then just glued it straight into the fur. And that is a pretty decent looking moth if I do say so myself. Sadly, since making these, a lot of them have lost their wings, but put a pin in that because I've got some plans. Now, you may have spotted my little fuzzy friend here sitting in the back of my videos for the past year. I've been so impatient to tell you about him, and from some of the comments, you guys have been impatient to hear about him too. So here's how I made my witch's companion, my giant moth.
Okay, so I got this really cool, like, battery-powered fairy wings made for, like, little kids off Amazon. I thought it'd be really cool to make a giant moth out of that's gonna sit on my hat. But I didn't read the listing fully because listen to this. And you can't turn off the music. Okay, but you can press it a second time to turn that off. So I guess anytime I want the moth to be flapping, I just have to hit it twice really hard so nobody has to be subjected to that. So after wrestling with this for a bit, we've got the casing open. So now I know that this is the motor that controls the wings, and this here is the speaker. I don't really want to fuck around with trying to like cut any wires or anything like that because I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to electronics. I have no idea how speakers work, but I ripped this off and like it worked. There's no freaking sound anymore. Thank God.
So I'm chucking together a cone of upholstery foam, gluing it around the base of these fairy wings to basically elongate the body a little bit. I had just enough left of this foam to make a head as well. Next, I'm hot gluing some faux fur over the head and the body, making sure the faux fur direction was all facing the same way. For the legs, I used some armature wire to create the shape, bulking up the legs using a little bit of tape, and then wrapping them in the same faux fur. And for the eyes, I just sculpted some pieces of foam clay.
Okay, so this guy is looking fantastic. Like, look at these little fuzzy leggies and his little moth paws. I love this so much. I'm very happy. It does look a little bit spidery, but I think that'll probably be solved once I get some wings on here.
So for the wings, we're ironing some heat and bond onto some delustered satin.
Test number 1. I got the wire and a little plastic bit here, and so I'm just hoping that that stays in place when I'm ironing this down. Just gonna kind of press that out. I guess they're moth wings. They don't have to be super perfect. Moths have weird scaly texture on their wings, right? And kind of go like right along the edge of the wire here just to kind of seal it in.
Well, so far so good, so now I'm just cutting out the wing shapes themselves. A quick test run with this one was looking pretty promising. Once the back wings were attached, I did the same sort of technique using the heat and bond satin to create some antenna and just kind of painted them in with a bit of beige. And to attach them, I could basically just stab the armature wire into the head. I was a little bit apprehensive about decorating these wings because like drawing and painting aren't really my strong point. So I just took it slow, tried to have some patience, which is not something that comes naturally to me. I was using a lot of that stippling technique where you sort of dot the paint on. I think I was just trying to give it some extra texture and make it feel kind of fuzzy. But for the record, this was about 2 days, I think, worth of painting. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out though.
All right, little buddy, let's see if those wings still work, hey? Hey, so I guess we're all done. Now, you guys know me by now. This is merely the base. We've got so much more pizzazz to add to this. Starting with these little guys who are gonna get some upgrades. So I'm pretty sure I remember having clips like this as a kid whose like whole thing is that they've got these springs on them so that like most of the time you move, the wings kind of quiver and flutter. And obviously these are supposed to be butterflies and not moths. And also they're far too bright and shiny for what I'm going for. But who's to say that I can't take these existing moth wings and sort of mount them over the top of these.
So I cut the wings off my paper moths and hot glued them basically just straight over the metal. I glued another piece to the underside so the metal was as covered as it can be. The body of the moth is getting glued straight over the metal as well.
So this worked incredibly well. I was expecting to have to troubleshoot this a fair bit more to get it working, but no, it's moving beautifully. It looks great. If I clip this onto myself, like I'm still getting some movement and swaying through those wings. I think the degree of movement is going to depend a lot on where I clip it onto myself. I can imagine having a couple of those on my hat and like fluttering slightly every time I move my head is going to be just awesome and just really bring this costume to life, which is ironic for a character about death, but you know what I mean. So now I've got a bunch of moths with just like some extra flappiness to them, I guess. But I'm not done with my flappy moths. We can go flappier. Nope, that sounded better in my head. Anyway, I bought a bunch of these, which is essentially like a little tiny wind-up toy. So how this works is you wind it up and that elastic band in the middle gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And now I'm gonna let this go, but I'm just gonna, sorry, can you get out of my personal space? Thank you. Okay, so maybe if I do this and then I wasn't expecting that to work that well that first time. All right, let me see if I can get that working again because that was really cool.
So like these aren't going to be part of the costume necessarily, they're just going to be like a thing that I can hold in my hand and release. I think it'd just be cool for a dramatic effect, honestly.
But first we have to get rid of all these lovely bright colors. So I'm removing the elastic band from the middle of each of these. And they're all getting a spray of white spray paint. And then a smattering of either grey or beige. After this, I'm just using a Sharpie to draw on some very rudimentary shapes.
So with the spray paint and the permanent marker on these, well, they kind of look like us, like this. But the thing is, you're not going to really see them like this. You're going to see them like enclosed in my hands, and then I'm going to be releasing them. So all they really have to do is look good while they're fluttering. And for that, all I needed was like the basic color and some crude enough markings that they're vaguely visible while it's moving around.
Now for some hat touch-ups, and I'm removing some of the straw from the middle here because it was sitting too high on my head. I have a brown fabric-friendly paint from Jacquard just to add some extra color to these straps that go under my chin. And I figured since I still had this paint out, I would add a little bit more detail back into the top too. Honestly, I think I was just having fun painting and didn't want it to stop once I finished the hat. And my little moth buddy needs some upgrades as well, so I need to cut into his fur at the bottom here, and I'm using a beige twill tape here as a strap. My goal here is to basically thread this under the fur all the way around his body, hence why I'm cutting into the fur a little bit just so I could pull it all the way around. There was a strap added around his shoulders and then some just around his lower abdomen here. Once he was done with the cosmetic surgery, we're going to glue this fur back down, but my cutting was not great, so there were a couple of little cut marks still visible once he was patched up. So once again, I'm getting out my Jacquard dye and painting a bit of this more fuzzy, shaggy faux fur. This paint is designed for airbrushing, so it does actually soak in quite well. Once it was dried and combed through, it wasn't really very sticky or tacky. I think I was just having so much fun with this paint, I decided to give my moth buddy a little bit of eyeliner too, and some cute little socks. Now that my little main piece was fully dry, we're just gluing that on, and now my little buddy's got a trendy new look and a couple of extra little straps for function. I'll show you why I attached the straps later, but firstly, I have these wooden rings that I got from a $2 shop. Again, we're bringing out that Jacquard dye. I don't know guys, I think I'm just obsessed with this right now. The twill tape that I attached to the moth, I'm just gonna sew through this ring.
All right, Moth Buddy is looking pretty good. My concept with the straps is basically to allow for a lot of versatility in how I carry him. So for example, if I want him just like sitting on my hand like this, I can just like grab the straps, wrap it around my palm. So he's just kind of hanging out here and I can hold him like this. If I want to, because he's got wires in his legs, I can kind of like bend them down so it looks more like he's gripping onto my wrist rather than me just like holding him precariously in the air. And then even with his wings going, I can just kind of like hold him there, you know? Or I can sit him on my shoulder like a parrot. So I've got this strap forward. The longer strap is in the back. There it is. So I can thread it through this little loop that I've made and then essentially like tie it off around there and have him sitting here. If that's getting in the way, I can slide him back a little bit like this. And this is definitely giving me Pokemon vibes. So in terms of moths, I think I'm all set. Next, I want to add some base layers, and I've already got this top and this skirt, but as I mentioned, I want to have a couple of different options so I can think about weather. So I've got two pairs of pants. This pair is actually Juniper's old pair before I did her upgrades, and while it is falling apart at a lot of the seams, that works totally fine for the Moth Witch because again, falling apart and fraying is kind of part of the theme. I am probably going to try and dye these a little bit darker because I don't really want to go for cream as much as I do browns and grays. This gray pair is pure linen and cost me $3 from an op shop. I freaking love secondhand stuff. I'm probably also going to dye this a darker gray just because I have a lot of lighter grays already. I want to bring some slightly darker elements in. This is one giant square of pure gray linen that I have cut a circle out of right in the middle to make a waistband. Yeah, so this is basically a circle skirt, but even more lazy because I'm not going to cut like a nice even circular hem. I'm not even going to hem it because again, I can get away with fraying on this outfit. I am going to chuck a waistband on there because as much as I love having all these frayed edges, I want to make sure it's durable and actually lasts. So I think that area is going to need to have some reinforcement.
With my gray bits shoved into a pot with not enough water, I'm just putting the dye straight in over the top. Not usually how you would do this, but I don't mind if I get mottled and uneven dyeing for this one. This was a gray dye, but I was nervous about how black this looked. With my dyed pieces then washed, rinsed, and hung up waiting to dry, I'm cutting a bunch of little strips of this beige jersey. This is an awkwardly sized leftover piece from when I was making things for Juniper. So I had a bunch of these strips and a ton of little tiny wooden rings, the same ones I mentioned earlier that I found in a $2 shop. I just started tying a bunch of them together together. My aim here was just to make some sort of decoration, but there was no plan beyond that. I think jersey fabric works really well for this sort of thing. It's stretchy, so it holds the knots really well, and it just looks really nice.
Good morning, everyone. It looks like overnight, pretty much all the pieces that I dyed and hung up have now dried fully. It does help that they're linen, so all of them are like relatively breathable, so they've just dried really quickly. This is my giant square skirt thing, and as you can see, it's come up with these beautiful mottled, almost tie-dye-like textures. I also put this through the washing machine afterwards, which helped actually fray the edge a little bit more. So I've got this beautiful frayed hemline. Well, I'm not gonna hem it, so I suppose it's a lack of hemline. On top of that, I've got the little off-cut piece that was left over from the skirt. I've got my $3 linen pants. I also put this through the dye. This bit of fabric, I believe, is a cotton cheesecloth. I don't think I showed you what it looked like beforehand, but it was just a very, very light gray. So much more subtle on this one, didn't soak it up quite as well. Not wanting to waste the dye, I chucked a couple of other pieces in there. One of those was this, which is just like a blouse I got from a secondhand store. And this was pretty much all this color to start with. So you can see the dye's taken pretty well on most of the fabric and not really touched the trim. But we'll come back to this because I think it'll work quite well for the winter version of this kit. Now I did put these little arm warmer things in there, and sadly they did not work quite as well. For some reason they've come up with like this bluey green tinge. I suspect that both of these are just pure polyester, so I imagine it's probably just a weird reaction with the dye. So I'm not using these with the Moth Witch anymore. I might keep them around for like a mermaid character or something for future.
Chucking a super quick and lazy waistband on my skirt. This is literally just beige bias binding. Zigzag stitching on with no regard to hiding any of these stitches or seams. A little bit of a gap, and the gray twine here means that I can tie it in and adjust it to whatever size I need.
And we got a skirt. Okay, thinking about outer layers, I have to have a cloak. I feel like it's just kind of a given for any kind of like fantasy character, especially if you want something that's going to protect you in like more wintry weather. For that, I actually have this fabric that has been sitting around in my stash for ages. Now this is called wool buckle or balkle. I don't know how to pronounce it. I just bought it because I loved this texture and I love these little frayed edges you're getting. It's a little bit darker than what I was going for, but I think I can work with it. And I think with the amount that I've got here, it's probably enough for at least like a mid-length cloak. Okay, so I've got this whole piece folded in half with the right sides together. This side down here is all of those beautiful fringy tassel-y bits that I want to keep in this cloak. So instead of going for a semicircle, I think what I'm going to try and do is cut out like kind of like triangles like this, so that all of the bottom edge is preserved, but it still comes to a smaller point at the top, right?
I have no idea if that made any sense to you guys, but once I've cut out these pieces and laid them together, you can kind of see I've managed to conserve this fringe area at the bottom. Once I sewed these together, I wasn't 100% happy with the shape, so I did tweak it a bunch, just like shortening it and making those triangles more pronounced. I'd love to give you guys a better explanation, but I have no idea either.
Okay, so I've been doing a little bit of mucking around with this off camera, but I think I'm pretty happy with the shape of this one. I did cut it like a little bit shorter from my initial pattern, and I gathered it a little bit at the shoulders and back. I don't know why that worked, but it seemed to want to do that, so I went with it. I have utilized every inch of like this lovely tasseled stuff at the bottom, so I haven't lost any of that. All right, so the next step is using the leftover of this fabric to make some kind of hood, and I'm gonna have to find some way to like finish or hem this front two lines here, because they are gonna fray and I can feel them fraying already, but I don't think it's gonna be a nice, pretty looking fray. And because like this is gonna be constantly moving about, I want them to be reinforced.
Luckily, my cloak piece only really used one side of the selvage, I think, and so the other side has this slightly shorter fringe, but it's still got a bit of that tasselness to it. So I'm going to try and use this edge for the rim of the hood. To get a rough idea on my hood shape and size, I'm going to lay this out, and then I'm going to use an existing hood that I have from, I think this was Bergschneider. They do some decent quality LARP and historical garments. Anyway, I'm only really using it for the vague shape. I don't really want this like full-on pointed hood that they have, but it gives me a start to make sure I'm not cutting this too small or gigantically huge. Once this was sewn up, we've got the rough shape ready to rumble. Luckily for me, the leftover linen piece from the skirt is just big enough that I can create a lining for this hood. So we're cutting out and sewing together the exact same shape and lining this up with the cloak itself. I am going to sew the edge of this linen piece right up against the fringy area of the hood. Exposed edges and stitches and all.
So cloak is done. I'm incredibly happy with it. I love the texture. I love this little tassel-y end bit. It's so warm. I always forget what a difference real wool makes. The only downside to real wool wool is I find it itchy as heck against my skin. So I'm really glad that I ended up doing the linen lining because it means that none of that itchy wool is sitting against my face or neck. Did do a couple of final touches to it off camera just because I got into the crafting zone and just didn't record. One of those was like a partial lining where I've just kind of done a lining panel at the front here. I didn't do the entire cape as you can see just because I'm lazy, but I'm hoping at least that panel at the front will also help give some structure to these front sections. Around the neck here, I initially sewed some of that yarn braiding like this stuff basically, but I didn't like how the cream looked against the darker colors. So I actually went back over it and colored in some of the cream yarn here with that jacquard fabric dye. And to fasten it, I've sewn on one side one of these little wooden rings, and on the other, this is literally just like a wooden bead that I just had lying around in my fabric stash. And luckily for me, this is actually the perfect size to act as a toggle, just putting it through that wooden ring and setting it like that. I do want an extra sort of capelet-y thing that's more like summer weather, like light and breathable. So for that, I have this cotton that I chucked in my grey dye pot earlier. And what I've done is I've cut out two pieces that are basically this shape and just sewn them together on one end and then left it open on the other. And so this one, nice and simple, can just wrap around my shoulders like this, and I'm gonna have something to attach it here. And I was thinking for decoration, I have this little triangle ring doodad that I made last night. I actually think that's gonna be really nice as a little decoration on the front of this little capelet.
For this bit, we're doing good old-fashioned hand stitching, just because I really only need like a couple of tacking stitches in as many places as I can get on that jersey fabric.
Now there's one more piece of this costume that I need to make, and that is essentially something to cover my hair. I like my hair, but I don't think that bright orange is quite the vibe for this costume. I have some weeks that could work, but I really want something that's going to be a little bit more comfy and a bit more summer friendly. So with this fabric, I have about this much left, and then like a couple little strips like this. And what I want to do with this is essentially make like a head covering that kind of sits like that. I know this looks very nun-like right now. Trust the process on this one. I have plans.
Just to get us started on this piece, I'm sewing a strip of this fabric to the front of this triangle so that I've got these loose straps at the front that I can essentially tie these around the back of my head. I'm going to pin a few of these sections down and then just cut off some of this length at the front here because I want to keep this piece as lightweight as possible. But we're not going light on the decoration, so I'm going to braid some of this yarn and linen that I've sewn onto the base, and around the corners and edges I'm going to sew on some of these cool little wooden beads. These also help to weigh it down so it's not going to have these awkward sticking up edges. I still have a handful of these wooden rings left over, so I've made an extra decoration to go on here. I have a handful of strips left of this beige jersey fabric, so tying a thread to one corner, I'm going to thread this through one of the wooden beads, essentially creating a bunch of little tiny tassels, which I'm also hand stitching on to add some extra detail around the edge. I want one piece that's going to go right along the top of my headpiece, so I'm going to do one more braid since I seem to be really enjoying them in this costume. And alongside a couple of last minute decorations, I'm going to pin this braid to my forehead, basically exactly where I want it to sit, and then once again we are going to hand stitch this on.
I think right now is like the perfect balance of decoration without it being like just too much. So now is probably as good a time as any to show you guys a really cool accessory that I got for this costume. This is a mask from the creator Fantasy, who creates these incredible embroidered glasses-friendly masks. So because they kind of sit off the face slightly, you can wear glasses behind them. And vision-wise, they're really not too bad. Hang on a tick, let me see if I can do this. Hey, there you go. So you can see that like, you can see really well out of just this lace. And so this is how everything's sitting with the mask and headdress. And the great thing is because I've got the cotton headdress and the mask that kind of sits off my face, so it's still relatively breathable. This is super, super comfy. I think even in the warmer temperatures, this is going to be pretty breathable. Like I'm not going to be sweating buckets. I don't know what it is, but something about having like eyes covered and just the mouth, it's a really good look. It was the same with my Vampire Fae character. Something about it I really like.
So with the extra decoration on the headpiece, I decided to move some of those tassels also to my little cloak piece, alongside some extra random little strips of grey fabric here and there, just because.
Okay, so I've got a fair bit of detail added to like most of my pieces now. One thing that I was debating adding some more to was my winter cloak, just because it's like a lot of plain dark fabric, but I don't think I will. I was experimenting with a thing. I don't like how it turned out, but you guys like seeing the failures just as much as the final product. So what I was trying to do was like hand stitch on. This is like a strip of just off-cut wool, and that was left over from Juniper's cloak in a couple of videos ago. And then this more bubbly one was trying to hand stitch on some of this like wool yarn. As an effect on its own, I think it's pretty cool, but I don't think this is going to work for my cloak. For starters, it's too light against the darker gray, but also it kind of looks like little worms or caterpillars, and I don't want that. I want to keep it with moths. Okay, I had to take a second and Google it because I'd forgotten that moths come from caterpillars. I just forgot that fact entirely. So I guess thematically I could get away with having like caterpillar-esque lines on the cloak, but I just don't think it aesthetically works with what I'm going for.
Also, I wasn't initially going to do a staff, but I found a really cool stick on a walk, took it home with me, and just like cut off the excess branches. I think I just decided on a whim that actually a staff would go perfectly with the Moth Witch. Once I cut it to a length I was happy with, I've got one of these little rubber stoppers that I'm just gonna hot glue onto the end of my stick. It just provides like a soft grippy bit. For the top, just to get the perfect shape, I hot glued another fork of the branch onto the existing one to kind of create like a bit more of like a basket shape between the 3 prongs. And to cover up those hot glue bits and to decorate it further, I've got some leftover strips of this wool that I'm just gonna start wrapping around my stick. I also have this strip of like woven jute that I bought from the Moth Witch and then didn't use because I realized it was going to be super scratchy on my costume, but for a staff, it's perfect. Around the top of the staff, I started gluing and wrapping around a bit of this jute twine too. As per usual with this one, I'm just kind of following my instinct. There's no real plan here. I had like 2 of these little jersey tassels left, so of course they ended up on the staff. And what better spot for one of my moths too. Now, I decided I just was not done with my jacquard paint, so I broke it back out again to add some detail to the top and the belt, just to really pronounce those lines. And of course, I had to add these to the hat and staff as well.
And now the Moth Witch has a really fancy stick. That was really good fun to make, honestly, and I'm really glad I put one of these little flappy winged butterfly things on it, because I think on something like a stick where you're constantly putting it down and lifting it up, it moves beautifully. So there's one more thing that I want to do, and that is do some airbrushing work on a bunch of the gray pieces. So airbrushing, I've dabbled in it a couple of times and I've always really sucked at it for various reasons. I recently attended an airbrushing workshop run by Lumen's Workshop, and it turns out one of my issues is using a really tiny little compressor like this because it was less intimidating than one of these things. But I think I have to admit to myself I need better equipment if I want to try and do airbrushing properly. So this is going to be my first ever test run of a actual decent sized compressor. Quick backstory nobody asked for, but when I was like a teenager, one of those little portable gas stoves that I took camping blew up in my face. It was terrifying, and luckily I wasn't too injured, but that's why basically anything that involves like pressurized cans or tanks scare the heck out of me. But today we're facing our fears and also pushing our luck, because I'm just going to go straight onto this and see how we go.
And you guys, investing in like a proper compressor and equipment was like eye-opening for me. It's like having bad eyesight and then putting on glasses for the first time. I just thought that airbrushing was super hard and finicky just by design, but this made everything so much smoother. I might have gone a little overboard, like experimenting, like crinkling things up and then spray painting over to sort of try and get some patterns formed in the folds of the fabric, but honestly, I was just having a really good time. So despite me going completely overboard with the airbrush on my grey pieces, I regret nothing.
Because this costume just involves so many like smaller little pieces put together, this is going to be as much a reveal for me as it is for you guys. I don't know how this is going to all look together. Okay, let's start here, because this is like the bare minimum. I've got like my nice skirt, the nice top, I've got a necklace. I'm not even sure if I showed you guys me making this, but it's just more of those wooden beads and tassely bits. But this is essentially like, I'm really hot and I'm really overstimulated and I want to be wearing the least amount of things and the comfiest amount of things. So it's just like everything's lightweight, everything's breathable, everything's comfy, there's not too much going on. I also don't think I showed you guys this. This is just like a little bit of netting sort of stuff. I just tied this together with some of the leftover yarn.
So separate from the Moth Witch, I actually already own a couple of grey shawls. So I've got this one here, which is, I believe, like felted wool, very thin, with like some strips of silk gauze felted into it. So you can see with these ends, that is the perfect vibe for the Moth Witch. And then this lovely light thing, which is, I believe, crocheted alpaca wool, or maybe llama wool, I don't know, one of those guys. And honestly, since this costume is moth themed, I have gone like really light on wings or any kind of sleeves. So like, this is kind of the perfect vibe. Alright, in terms of like summer weather, give or take the hat, this is going to be kind of my default. All of my fabrics are super light and breathable. There's not too much on me that's weighing me down. Also, the fact that I only needed to do makeup on like the lower part of my face, amazing. Love that. And I'm super happy with all of my little fluttery moths. I think they really help bring everything to life. I'm not having heaps of luck with the little wind-up ones, but I think I just need to practice some more. And as for my hat, I ditched the extra ribbons so fast, but I am going to keep these around. They might be useful on those really windy days. And I worked out that my moth companion can perch on the staff. That's going to be incredibly useful if I'm out and about and trying to save space on what I'm carrying. So if I want to start choosing some different layers for more wintry sort of stuff, one of the first things I'm going to go to is this, which is just the most gorgeous freaking stay. I absolutely love this. This is from a creator called The Dark Modiste, and this was custom made for me. I've had it for quite a while now, but I always intended to wear it with the Moth Witch. One of my favorite things about it is fully reversible, so I could wear it with this light grey side or this side here. But this side has just the most incredible texture to it, so I'm definitely going with that. Alright, this is sitting beautifully, but you may have noticed, of course, that this is going for those darker greys, which is fine because a lot of my winter stuff is going to be those darker greys, so I'm going to layer up some other things. This stay was the perfect colour for my linen skirt, and I'm wearing my thermals and the pants underneath. That, alongside my shawls and my hood, I was super cozy. The winter version definitely leans slightly more into a cottagecore vibe, especially adding in the long sleeve blouse that I dyed. It makes me feel like the Moth Witch is venturing into town to get supplies, so this is like her Sunday best. And of course we had to test drive this out in the woods, and by woods I mean a clump of trees in a park not far from my house. I'm so glad I did, because as the sun was going down and the shadows crept in, that dusk light gave everything that more mysterious cryptid vibe that I wanted. Much harder to get that vibe in my well-lit cozy little workshop. And we got to meet a lovely lady and her whippet Ashy.
We know they're really fairies.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
She was very curious about me, but super anxious, but I've never met any greyhounds or whippets that aren't. And honestly, same. That'll do.
Hi.
I'm the Moth Witch. Look at my moth.
My moth is amazing.
I just realized I've gone this whole video without making a single lamp joke, and I'm disappointed in myself. Moths like lamps. Done. It totally counts, alright?
God damn you guys, I had so much fun with this one. I think between the Vampire Fae ball gown, Juniper upgrades, and now the Moth Witch, I've really enjoyed creating some original designs and just following my own whims. And the Moth Witch has a lot of meaning I've put into it. A massive thank you to Milanote for sponsoring this project, and a huge and heartfelt thank you, as always, to my ultimate supporters on Patreon. Artemis, Dakota, Fluky, Residual Images, Rakashin, Robert Mischief, Tamara, Veralyn, and Yuri. And a big thank you to these other incredible Patreon supporters who are on screen now. Come and join us over on Patreon. I post behind the scenes, work in progress, and exclusive content and videos that I don't post anywhere else. And joining is the best way to support me so I can keep making weird and whimsical projects like this. But even just being here, watching, subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing, all those little things that keep the YouTube robots happy is a huge help to me. So thank you guys very much for being here, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next video. Bye!